I'm David with QBOT, and I'm going to show QBOT today on the Moxie on the loft frame, the loft 8-foot frame. The QBOT does connect to just about all the quilting machines and frames on the market. So we have QBOTs on Voyager 17s from a long time ago that are 80-pound machines. We have them on 36-inch Gamble machines. We have commercial customers. We run the gamut with the QBOT on all machines and frames, just about all machines and frames. Today, though, we are going to be looking at the Moxie on the loft frame, and I have a panel set up here on my frame, and I'm just going to go through the basics of what QBOT does. We're going to start out with block quilting. We're going to do some edge-to-edge quilting. We're going to do some line quilting, and if time permits, we'll get into a little bit of crosshatch at the end, but if we miss the crosshatch today, we'll get to it later in the week. We're going to be here 5 days, so we've got plenty of things to go over, but we do have plenty of time to get over it. So when you first start your QBOT and you look at my screen here, we have a very intuitive display. We can see pattern quilting, line quilting, applique, echo, 4-point quick scale, crosshatch. We can record our free motion, and then we have a little section that is design management when you're importing and saving designs. We're going to start out with pattern quilting, which is pretty much the easiest thing. If we go into pattern quilting, and sometimes when you think about robotic quilting, you think about, oh, I've got to do a lot of math. I have to figure out where to put things. QBOT makes all that stuff easy. We have the most intuitive interface. So let's go back to the tablet. And in our upper left of our tablet, it says choose quilting area. Well, on my fabric here, I'm just going to choose this box because I know what I'm going to put in here. I'm going to put in a block. And quilts have blocks. And one of the first things you'll do with QBOT is a quilt that has blocks in it. And you just want to put designs in that block. I've selected 4 points to define this block, but I can select as many points as you want to select the boundary. The boundary selection is just for you. What you're going to, it's for your benefit, I should say. The QBOT defines that boundary, uses it as a rough scaling for the design you put in, but then you have all of the control in the world once the design's in there. It's just for your benefit. So back to the screen, we have select inner boundary shape. With QBOT, we can knock out appliques. If you have something in the center of your block that you want to quilt around, that's what this inner boundary is for. But for this quick demo, we're just going to say no inner boundary shape. And let's choose a block. Just by selecting the folder, I see the blocks that come with QBOT. So I'm just going to scroll and I'm going to tap on this heart block, which is a feather heart block. So it accomplishes a couple of things. It does that heart, which everybody loves, and it does a feather around it, which everybody dreads if you're free motioning and you're a beginner. So we're going to do that. It fits inside that block, but it touches the upper and lower boundary of the block. So I want to modify that. Our modifying is very easy as well. If I use one finger, I can move that block around. If I use 2 fingers, I can scale it. If I use 3 fingers, I can rotate it. So that's the first method for manipulating or modifying a block design, or in fact, any design when we're using QBOT. We have 3 methods to manipulate or modify a design. We start with our fingers, 1, 2, or 3 fingers, but we also have little nudge buttons. We can nudge it. And if we're really particular, we can dial in an exact number. So here, for instance, I rotated it a little bit, but it's at 28 degrees or 28.21 degrees. If I wanted that in there at 45 degrees, I would just put it in, type in 45, and be done with it. I want it back at 0 degrees for the demo, so I'm just going to put it back to 0. If I wanted to scale it, any particular scale, I could dial that in. And you know what? I'm going to go to 90% scale. So that looks good. It looks like it's a little low to the bottom border, so I'm going to nudge it up. So now I'm using that nudge button to demonstrate the 3 different ways we can move a design and modify a design when we put it into the block. Now the next thing is, well, we need to move to the start point so that we can start quilting. So we're press done, and then the button is move to the start point. We press that button, and QBOT takes off, and it goes right to the top. Now, one thing that I forgot to mention when I was selecting those points, and for the folks that are really paying attention, you would have noticed that, wait a minute, where is he selecting those points from? Because that needle was not at the corner when I was choosing those points. Correct, I forgot to mention I was using our laser pointer right here on the side. This laser is a known offset from the center, and it gives us a really nice way to get a precise look at, where we're actually selecting. When you're looking down at the needle and you're looking around the foot, sometimes you can't get that precision that you need. So anyway, back to the quilting. We're ready to go. We go on our tablet and we press the go button. At that point, I have tie off stitches turned on, and we're going to just start quilting around this block. It's going to do the outer perimeter first, and then it will start working on the inside. And I can adjust my tension a little bit. I think I'm pulling up my bobbin just a little bit much, but we'll let that go. Now, pattern quilting or block quilting, while this is going on, I'll show you lots of examples of what block quilting can do, and elevating precision so you can see what QBOT can do. If we go over here to the table, you can see this was a little quilt block. It's actually, I guess, a little miniature quilt where the center portion was a block. All I did was select the outer boundary, and I probably used 6 or 8 points to define it. And then I placed this design. This was a design that is in QBOT. I just placed that design, made sure it looked like it was in the right position, and I pressed go. Super simple. Similarly, I'll just show some examples. This is another block design, and we can show how beautifully QBOT quilts out curves, and with the stitch regulation of the Moxie, you can see how beautiful that is. If you tried to freehand this, you might be able to get something close, but in reality, no, you would not be able to do that as effectively. This is kind of a neat block because it looks like it might be one design, but actually it's 2 designs. This design right here, which is just this portion, was rotated and positioned an extra 3 times to fill in that corner. Then we used a fast track design, which is these are kind of like spirograph designs from our youth. We used a fast track design to fill that up in the middle. So we combined 2 designs to make that block. Here's the heart that we're doing right now with the feathered heart. Another thing that is really nice is when you can do leaves and things like that. Here is another design that we then finished off with some cross hatching in the center. And then as we get into the more detailed things, this could be used as on a table runner or even on the centerpiece of a quilt. This is very, very detailed. And then even more detailed as we get in, I guess that's the bobbin side here. We'll do the top side. You can see how beautifully it does all of the circles and so forth. And this is I think a Zen doodle design of some sort. And here, just how beautiful it can quilt those kinds of designs. So this shows the precision. And here you can see the backtracking over and actually you really can't see it other than it's a little bit more bold, the backtracking over the design. It's very nice. So back at the frame, we've completed that stitch out. I pull up my bobbin thread. And I'll adjust my tension just a little bit more. And now we exit out. Now, the second thing on quilts, and remember today is just the background, we're getting started and give you the basics. The next thing on quilts is, well, okay, I've got my blocks done. Now let's do an edge-to-edge design. How well does QBOT do edge-to-edge designs? Well, it's basically the same thing as a block. but now we're going a longer distance. Easy, we just select a different boundary. And then when we want to do the next row, how hard is it to do the next row? We can all get our heads around doing one row, but when we have to nest that next row, how hard is that? So let's go back over here to the frame, and we're going to do pattern quilting again. We'll select our points. Now again, here I'm using the offset feature, and here you can see the laser. So I'm selecting using this point right here. So I'm selecting our boundary, and I'm going to select several points just to reinforce that we just select as many points that we need to define the boundary of our block or of our quilt. And we're going to pretend that this was my left and right edges are the edges of the quilt, or they are the inner part of the frame, inner part of the quilt. So before the border. So in an edge to edge, you can go all the way to the edges, or maybe you're just doing the inside central portion of the quilt. I selected my boundary here. I'll set another point there, press done. We're not going to knock out anything again. And we'll go into our modern quilt designs. And I like this one to show because it shows several things. That obviously is not an edge-to-edge design. That is a single element. So what do we do with that? Well, we go into our favorite modify command, use 2 fingers to pinch it a little bit. And let's just go in here and we have 1. Well, still not an edge-to-edge. So we hit our chain button. And we'll chain a few together. So let's chain 5 together. And I'll scroll those, nudge those over so it looks really good as an edge to edge. And it looks good. So I'm going to say done. Now, because I've already sized this, and if this were a real quilt, I want to save this design so I don't have to do that again. So I'll save the design and I'll call it Demo EE. And so just in case, if something happened, the power went out and I needed to get that design back at that particular size, no problem. It's now saved. I move to the start point. Press the needle up, needle down to get my bobbin thread up. And then I just press go. And we'll let that go. And that's going to sew this out. Now, while that's sewing out, we'll put that into the bottom so you can continue to watch it. I'll show you some examples of edge-to-edge designs. Now, what we have going on there right now is this design, which I have done on, this has been done on a piece of leather. So when working with leather, you have to be really certain that you back it with either a muslin or a stabilizer of some sort, because it's very stretchy. So I've got my muslin, I've got my batting to give it some loft and texture. So when it has a little bit of a bumpiness to it. And then this can be used in making a bag or something else. You're basically making fabric when you're doing this kind of work. Again, this is the first row was stitched out, second row was offset and nested, and then we just marched down and did the following rows. Another example of an offset nest is this kind of affair where we have a row here, and when you quilt out just a row, it doesn't really show the full detail until you quilt the next row, and then it really pulls out that scallop effect and how beautiful QBOT does this. Now, you can try to follow a pantograph. Nothing wrong with that, but the perfection comes when you have a QBOT. Another example of some nesting, and this actually would be a wonderful design on a quilt, especially quilts that have a lot of defects. You quilt it a little bit denser and in edge-to-edge manner, and it hides the defects of the quilt, and you really makes everything pop. But again, here is those leaves chained together. Also very difficult to do in a nice repeatable way without, unless you have a lot of practice and are a professional. And again, our meander, which is always kind of the easiest thing to do when you think about it. You think, oh, I'll just do a meander. And then one of the things when starting with QBOT was, well, without a QBOT, for instance, you start quilting and then if you're not super well practiced, you're meandering, you're doing something, and then you kind of lose the connection between your brain and your hand freezes or whatever, and you say, oh, where am I going next? Well, with QBOT, you get to think about it, pull in the design, set everything nicely, press go, and you don't have to think about it anymore, which is kind of nice. We've quilted out our first row, back to the quilt, and let me pull up my bobbin thread and snip it one more time. And it's now time to do that second row. And again, let's see, what did I got a little something stuck there. I'm not going to worry about it right now. So I want to put in my next row, and I want this particular design, I know, nests with an offset. So let's do that. How hard can this be? Let's just go into our tablet. We'll say overlay, modify. I just drag it down with my finger, and you can see the next row is shaded red. I drag it down, I nudge it over, and I just nudge it so that I have the right amount of space between our stitching lines and not too much negative space. It's not exactly clear that it's a nested design. So there's not an excessive gap and it's not excessively crunched together. So this looks pretty good. I'll nudge it to the right maybe once. And then look, we have a problem on the right-hand side. It's not long enough. So what do? We press the chain button, and now it's too long. It goes past the borders. So this would mean you're quilting out into the air, or you're quilting into a border if this were the inner part of the quilt. No fear. We press the trim button, and we trim to the boundary. And then we say done. And just like that, it's trimmed everything, and we're ready to quilt again. We move to the start point. Needle up, needle down, pull that bobbin thread up, and press go. Now it's going to quilt that second row, and it's just that easy. I can't emphasize the ease of what I'm doing here. Now, I know what I'm doing because I practiced a little bit with QBOT, but the sequence of steps that we did were the same for everybody. You select your boundary, you select your design, you modify it so that it looks right on the screen. You press go, pull up your bobbin thread, and well, go to move to start, pull up your bobbin thread and press go again. And it's hands off from there. And the skill of your hands doesn't matter at this point. And that was the basic philosophy of QBOT when we came out with QBOT. In the beginning with Lighten Up technologies, what we were doing was we were making the quilter's cruise control at the very beginning of our business, which is a stitch length regulator for short mid-arm sewing machines, so the domestic machines. We got so proficient at making the quilter's cruise control, then we stopped going to shows as often because we were getting busy with production of our device. So the demonstration, we would demonstrate free motion quilting all the time. But then when it came time to quilt our own quilts, because we were into production so much, we didn't know how to quilt anymore. We lost that ability of practice, which gave birth to the QBOT, because there's lots of people that just don't have time in their day or week, month, year to pick up a hobby and really, really dedicate the time it takes to become super proficient. But with QBOT, it cuts that learning curve, I don't know, in by a factor of 10 or 15, maybe 20, depending on your skill level. So all you really need to do is choose some points, pick a design, and place it into the area. All right, so this is just about finished up. We're ready to show you the next thing, because if pattern quilting wasn't quick enough, there's even a quicker method to get quilting. So just let this do its thing. All right, so we're finished with that. Pull up my bobbin thread again. And I do this just so that the thread doesn't, we don't have a lot of things dangling on the back of the quilt when we're all done. All right, now let's just take a look at that through the needle cam here. We can see just how nicely that nested. And if we were doing a quilt, there is no difference in doing a quilt than doing what we did just right here. One other thing that's very easy to do, if you had to quilt something very quickly, or if you have a question, well, what if you're not the best piecer in the world? Or you get a quilt in from somebody and they are definitely not the best piecer in the world, and things are a little bit strange looking, maybe particularly in blocks. This is where block quilting robotically can look like a disaster if you're not paying attention. Because if the blocks are just off just a bit, but your quilting is robotically correct, what gets highlighted is there's a difference between what it should be and what it actually is. And you can take a quilt that otherwise would look great. If you put an edge to edge on it, you'd say, wow, everything is square and beautiful. But if you try to do blocks in it, you'll say, whoa, those are perfect blocks inside crazy piece quilt blocks. So on my fabric here, I've made such a block where, say this is a 9 patch, and you can see that nothing is parallel. It is crazy. So we have a thing that takes care of that, a feature that takes care of that. It's called 4-point quick scale. So I'll press that. I go into 4-point quick scale, and it says choose quilting area, choose upper right. Now this is one function that is critical, that you choose the boundary in the specific order. This is the only function in QBOT that when you choose the boundary, it's doing a complicated calculation on skewing, rotating, and shifting the design. So we have to choose it the way QBOT says, and you only get 4 points. Choose upper right. So we're going to choose that upper right point. And again, I'm following my laser. And because I don't want if this were a real block, I wouldn't want my design to actually touch the edges. So I'm going to pull that point in just a skosh, about 1/8 of an inch or so. So I'm going to put that dot right here. Choose that point. Now I'm going to go to the lower right. Choose. It says to go to the upper left. Choose. And I'm going to go to the lower left. Choose. And there it is. You can see that it's clearly not square, not rectangular. It is strange. So I'm going to do a fast tracks design that highlights that a little bit. So I took that quilting area, which is a little bit strange, placed in a design that is typically rectangular or square, and it automatically skewed it. That all I need to do now is move to the start point again, pull up my bobbin thread, and press go. So I think what we can see here is that you can tell that I haven't done any kind of mathematics on this. I'm just choosing points and letting it rip, so to speak. And then after this, we're going to do one last thing, which is line quilting, which is a very, very powerful tool. We'll let this quilt out. It's kind of a quick design. And you can see it's come in and it's going to miss the edge because I pulled it in 1/8 of an inch. So there it is, perfectly done. We can just watch in awe. All right, so this is just about finished up. And then we'll do a quick little thing about line quilting, which is really probably the last thing in the basics of quilting, because we do in the ditch stitching sometimes. Well, we have a powerful feature that not only does that, but it takes it one step further. So for instance, I'm going to go into line quilting, and we're going to pretend we're stitching in the ditch, but we're going to add something. We're going to pretend we're in the ditch of a sashing. So let's go in the ditch of this sashing strip. So the sashing is this right here, this strip, and it's been broken up. So let's do something neat. We're going to select points like this. Now I can do in the ditch stitching, but I'm a little close on time here. I want to show taking it up one notch. So I've selected points along the line here with my laser, and I'm going to do an open path, closed path, that's fine. I'm going to say done. And let's do something kind of neat. We're going to put some pin cushions on it. Actually, let's go back and do open path. Say done. We're going to put some pin cushions on it, and we're going to do it on both sides. So just like that, just a couple of simple clicks, we've made a whole new design, which is really good and can save the day on a lot of quilts. Because if we tried to do this and choose an area and put in a detailed design, it would be way too dense. And sometimes you just need a little something to match the quilting that you've done in other parts of the quilt. You match the density. So just like that, and it's going to nail each one of those points because I selected those points. It's nailing each one. Now, as that's doing that, I've got one example over here where I did exactly that. Same procedure right here. Here was a little mini border. On one side, I did what I just did, except just on the half. And on the other side, along this line, I did one here, and then I selected this point, so it gave a larger arc, and it gave something that filled in that area, tacked it down nicely, looks appropriate for the rest of the quilt, but isn't even a design on the QBOT. It's just selecting points and pressing go.